Hello everyone, hello and welcome to Demonstrably Not Sorkai. Firstly, shout out to that battler behind me there, and secondly, I'm immediately assuming that this level 60 roulette is going to throw us into Aetherochemical research facility. I'm sure a lot of you are in my position running this over and over again for those sweet juicy esos, and when I got to maybe my 30th run, it occurred to me that I actually never published a lore tour for this place, which when considering the history and culture, oh yeah, of course, here we go. History and culture of the Allagans, this is definitely one of the most interesting instances in the game. So here we are, the long overdue ARF lore tour. Most groups have been smashing this in under 20 minutes, so I'm probably gonna have to talk at light speed, so strap in. So the primary purpose of this facility is evidently to research and ultimately prototype weapons and tools for the Allagan war machine, and to do so both by studying and by using the power directly emanating from the warring Triad, which are held in the containment bays below, although at this point of the story we're yet to discover their existence. So we're in here chasing after Archbishop Thordan and his Heavensward, who are planning to ascend themselves to primals, but once again it is really unclear why they need to be here of all places to do so until we discover the warring Triad and realize that Thordan intended to tap into their ether to make himself effectively invincible. Okay, so we're in Auto Machina research, pretty self-explanatory. We've got clockwork repurposes here, which work as the drones and technicians for the facility, and the clockwork hunters, which seem to be essentially a more advanced model of previous infantry units we've seen, like the clockwork paladins, knights, and engineers. Since pretty much every unit we see in here appears to be more advanced than most of what we find in the Binding Coils, I think it's safe to say that this is a more recently constructed facility, or at least a facility that saw continued use and continued upgrades for quite a while after the construction of Dalamud. And that makes a lot of sense when you think about it. When Alec invaded Mericidia, the first real threat they encountered would definitely have been the dragons, so it's fairly safe to assume that they defeated and bound Bahamut before they encountered Sephiroth and the rest of the Triad, assuming that they too were native to Mericidia. Critical bugs here are obviously programming joke. As to their actual function, it might be that one of the machines that should be producing drones or hunters is misfiring and spitting out these things instead. Who knows? Avengers here are just big hunters, and the enforcement droid that we just destroyed, I imagine would have been intended to supplement or replace the existing core of dreadnoughts. Now, here are some of the older models we're more familiar with from the Binding Coil, but they are scrambled. So here I look again at the clockwork repurposes and hazard that these older models are due to have their chassis and software upgraded into the newer hunters and such, and that they were only partway through this process when Azazlar was shut down and abandoned. Now we're converging here on the Garlean 6th Legion, sorry I just had to take a breath there, led by regular Van Hydrus, and we'll talk about what they're doing here in just a moment. But first we have a Magitech Vanguard, and we know of course that the Empire's Magitech is based on the scraps of Allagan designs that were rediscovered by the late Emperor Solus Zos Galvus, and that the whole Garlean military is in fact this sort of pale ghost of Allagan engineering. Anyway, we already know that the Garlean military terms are modeled on those of ancient Rome, so an Optio was ranked below his Centurion, basically a lieutenant. Medicus was of course a combat medic, and a Tesserarius was a watch commander that would organize and command the nightly watch whilst out on campaign, as well as administrate scouting parties and answer a second to the Optio. So here is regular Van Hydrus, Legatus of the 6th Imperial Legion, and a far more compliant and obedient little Garlean than our old renegade friend Gaius Van Belsar was. He has learned that the research facility contains the secrets to the technology of binding primals alive in stasis and thus halting their cycle of rebirth, which the Garleans believe to be the true answer to eliminating the primal threat. Well, between that and committing genocide against any beast race that summons it. Now, this has happened a number of times that we know of, firstly with Bahamut, which didn't end so well, and secondly with Gaius' use of the Ultima weapon to contain Ifrit, Titan, and Garuda, which once again quite literally blew up in his face. Quite why Hydrus and Galvus think that this time could be any different, it's quite beyond me. But then again, Belsar was acting very much as on his own, I should say, throughout ARR, with no orders from or contact with the capital, which was seemingly in the middle of a war of secession at the time. So I guess they penned down Gaius's failures as being entirely his own and probably having a lot to do with his negotiations with Ascians, which Regulus seems bright enough to be avoiding for the time being. I do definitely think Gaius was a more interesting character than Regular, but Regulus seems to have even less qualms about getting his hands dirty, so I suppose you have to give him that. Anyway, it seems for now that the Garleans are just as over their heads here as they were in turn 1 of First Coil, although for slightly different reasons. For that, it was because of the Algan defense node. For this, it's because they were just lucky enough to run into us, right? So we can put them behind us, please. Guys, fall down. Yes, we can put them behind us. Yeah, we'll meet again. I know that. You know that. We're going to have good fun, you and I, later in here. Yeah, so we can put them behind us for now and focus on the task at hand, which is, of course, the summary assassination of Thordan and whatever Ascians are bold enough to stand in our way now that we have fully regained and redoubled the blessing of light. So, here we are, moving through material transport and to bioweapon research, and what is happening here seems to be that the Algans they melt down the various creatures, prisoners, victims, void saints, anything and everything into their constituent components, and from these develop these genetically modified clones. And yeah, I think modified clones is the best way to put it. And there seems to be some other stuff going on here, some kind of ethereal explosion, some damage to the facility. We might work out what that is in just a little bit. But we're going to have some of these said synthetic clones descending on us now. We have these cultured Naga, which we know to be synthetic void scent, and the culture Empus, which I think we can probably assume to belong to the same category. The pre-cultured biomass are obviously the ones that aren't quite ripe yet, and the bioculture node here is evidently that which regulates these incubation chambers. Now, these Lamia here are likely chimerical mixes of humans and void scent, but we have seen a few presumably pure void scent that can take the form of a Lamia, such as Echidna in the Void Arc, so they may be just pure synthetic void scent. However, we're going to be coming up a minute to what are very clearly more chimerical creations, which I think is quite interesting. And if you've seen my tour for the Weeping City of Mark more recently, you'll see that the Algans actually created void scent human chimeras, not just human animal or animal chimerical creatures, which I think is quite interesting. Now we have at least 8 incubation bays, I should say. Incubation, what the hell is that? We've done 7 and 8. I don't know where the other 6 here. But here we are, we have cultured reptoids, and particularly the Mirrorites. They're clearly chimerical experiments that contain both organic and mechanical components, which is pretty interesting. And of course, we first encountered the Mirrorites around the fallen shard of Dalamud in eastern Thanalan. And I don't think we knew for quite a while, actually, that they were in fact Allagan creations, although, you know, observant people probably would have hazarded a guess at that point. The biohazards are once again experiments that are either not ripe or have suffered some critical failure, and the cultured chimera, of course, speaks for itself. And if it wasn't obvious to everyone, every single chimera that we fight, including the one in, oh my god, what's the name of that dungeon? I've just had a complete mental blank. Anyway, in the level 30 something dungeon with all the ants and whatnot, someone's going to absolutely roast me for forgetting that at this moment. That is an Allagan chimera that's been hanging around down there for a while. I keep thinking it's not the Sunken Temple. Anyway, that's not important, because we're now moving into evaluation and authentication. Where we fought regular earlier was the proving grounds for the Auto Machina prototypes, and this is the equivalent for the Allagan bioweapons. Hamarkus or Harmarket, I should say, was an Egyptian god of the dawn and of wisdom, usually represented as a sphinx, and it has been posited that the Great Sphinx at Giza was in fact a project commissioned by the 4th dynasty pharaoh Khafre to transplant his face onto the image of Harmraket and thus solidify some kind of association or conflation between himself and the god. Having a sphinx as a trial, of course, will always make me think of the riddle of the Sphinx, the trial imposed upon Oedipus as told by Sophocles. Anyway, the purpose of the Allegan Harmachis is obviously to test the cultured bioweapons in a variety of combat scenarios. In order to evaluate their battlefield efficacy, Harmachis assumes that we are in fact one of these weapons and decides, as we will see in just a moment, anti-machina testing complete, decides that we are outstanding and approved for mass consumption. And there you go, riddle of the Sphinx. That is a very, very, very clear allusion to Sophocles and to Oedipus Tyrannus or Oedipus Rex. There we go. Outstanding, subject approved for mass consumption. That is a terrifying thought. Could you imagine if the Allegans managed to get a clone of a warrior of light like us and mass produced them? I don't want to think about that. Now, it's really interesting that in all this we can see that Alleg, even having subjugated Eorzea and most of Aldenard, Mericidia, presumably Ilzabad, given that the Garleans have found ruins there, having become the most powerful nation this star has ever seen. They were not even beginning to slow down before the calamity which annihilated them. They conquered pretty much everything, and yet they continued to mass produce automachina and bioweapons, continued to milk the warring triad for chemical weapons, such as the growth serum they developed from Sephiroth and used on Amon, Phlegathon, and the clone Zande. Monitoring drone. These things are obviously just drifting around the facility, keeping an eye on everything. And the facility dreadnought, again, this is a very old model dreadnought. I assume that they're using this thing for some kind of manual maintenance or manual labor, carrying things around. Maybe they're gonna upgrade it and convert it into one of those droids as well, but it seems for the moment that that's doing some heavy lifting for us. Triad control. Well, that was our first hint in 3.0 that we would be encountering the Warring Triad. Well, the first hint other than, you know, seeing their damn statues on the top of Azazlar. But it's nice that they are dropping some hints here as to what our real purpose here and the real purpose of the Heavensward is before we've even discovered it for ourselves. Now, speaking of clones, we have an Allegan Conjurer and Thaumaturge here, and we can see that, like with Une and Doga from the Crystal Tower series, the Allegan citizens themselves were ancient cousins of the hero. Whether they were literally what we could describe as hero, I mean, that's up for debate. I think of them as ancient cousins in the way that, you know, in various fantasy universes where we got elves, you think of like high elves as, you know, ancient cousins of modern elves, and although they look the same, there is some significant difference. Those clones, I imagine, they're less like the perfect and intelligent clones like Une and Doga, and probably more like the clones of Jango Fett in the Star Wars sequels, designed to be more pliant. Now, I've noticed before that not all of the clones in here have the typical crimson eyes, which we see in Une and Doga, that are apparently a sign of the royal line of Alleg. However, if you look closely, you'll see, and I will try to look closely once we come up to this next group, you'll see that the clone Thaumaturges do have them, which is very interesting. Although I think the other clones don't, I believe. I might be wrong. I mean, it's difficult to see in this light and with all the things that are going on, but I'm pretty sure the Thaumaturges, they have the red eyes, and the clone Conjurers do not. But like I said, we'll try to get a look at that around all these damn attack effects. Come on, please, please. Yeah, they're red. They're definitely red. Okay, I don't know if you guys saw that, but they are definitely red. And of course, cultured Shabti. We fought some more of them before, and I think we're about to come up to some more of them now. They are more cultured Void Sense, and the Ushabti are historically little figures that were buried with ancient Egyptians to serve as slaves or minions in the afterlife. Yeah, here we have some more here. So there's that. And I'm going to take a break until we move into the next area and take a drink and take a deep breath. So I'll talk to you guys in just a second. Cutter's Cry. How the hell could I forget the name of Cutter's Cry? Cutter's Cry, the level 38 dungeon. As I was saying before, coming all the way back around, the Chimera in Cutter's Cry is an elegant survivor. Now we're moving into the Neuralink nacelle. A nacelle is basically a synonym for a cradle or a chassis, and we know that a Neuralink was the binding mechanism that the Allagans used for both primals and dragons. So this room here is basically, an empty containment bay. And subsequently we can see on the far side of the room, can we see it? I think we saw it when we were moving in. Anyway, we see on the far side of the room the Tomlith, which is Hydra's ultimate prize that Unukalhai later uses as bait to try and have us kill him. Now, is this empty because it is a spare or yet to be used, or is it empty because something has already escaped from it? I can't help but wonder by looking at the state of the room and the area around it that there has been some kind of accident or critical failure, and that this room did actually once contain some Neuralinked creature which has been released or has broken out, and that we might end up hearing something about down the track in the future. Now, Laha Brea and Igeorm just broke every rule, every single rule in the Ascian handbook by directly interfering with us here. But they really just had enough with us, and I don't really blame them. You know, Laha Brea, we've already kicked his ass a few times. Unfortunately for them, they haven't realized what happened a little while ago after we met with Tiamat, and there's really no chance they can pull anything like the bullshit Igeorm tried with us when she took the key after we killed Bismarck. And they're screwed, basically. They're in deep trouble. No savage for you, Laha Brea. You're just a joke. Anyway, so Ascian Prime. Ascian Prime is actually a pretty big deal when it comes to understanding the Echo. Firstly, this was the only form that we saw in Ascian taking during 1.0, and I'll put a screenshot up for that here for just a moment. We originally assumed that this was the true form of an individual Ascian, but it seems the noumenal flexibility of the Echo, it allows them to fuse their souls into this one superpowered Ascian Prime. So they're Gogeta, basically. The interesting implication is that there's really no reason we shouldn't be able to do the same thing at some future point with someone else who possesses the Echo, such as Minfilia, Kryl, Unukalhai, the Warriors of Darkness, maybe. There's even a potential here for us to literally eat the souls of Ascians. I know that might sound a little bit far-fetched, but you know, we could be soul eaters. I don't see why not. Of course, if we have enough willpower to, you know, dominate them in the same way that Nidhogg dominates Astinian. But just like as we saw with Nidhogg and Astinian, there are a lot of significant risks with trying that kind of nonsense. My point, though, is that from this one fight, we see a lot of potential mechanisms, potential plot points involving the Echo in future. Now, the question that remains from the aftermath of this, we used the white Orosite that was conveniently found, you know, with the remaining of Moonbreeder's effects, even though she explicitly told us that she's only constructed one. She was obviously being cheeky. And we used that to destroy Igeorm shortly. And then Thordan uses the sword Ascalon, which is formed around the Eye of Nidhogg, to absorb the soul of Laha Brea. So we get two birds stone at once, basically. And the question remains whether he destroyed Laha Brea in that process, or when he was trying to destroy us with ultimate end, or whether Laha Brea's soul is still alive inside the eye there. And of course, if it is, and to put this in context for you guys, we're just past the point of 3.3. We've seen the 3.3 story. That's where we're up to. We've just seen the Warrior of Light and Alphino throw Nidhogg's eyes down into the chasm of the Sea of Clouds, off the Steps of Faith. And they're completely devoid of Nidhogg's soul and any of Nidhogg's essence, presumably. But we saw one of the Warriors of Darkness having a little peek there. And it's not unreasonable to suppose that they might be able to retrieve La Habrea, or at least use what's left of La Habrea to form another Ascian Prime, maybe with Elidibus. Anyway, there is the Aetherochemical Research Facility, and quite possibly the fastest lore tour ever. Hopefully some of these discussions makes farming this dungeon a little less tedious for you in the coming weeks. Hopefully weeks. Hopefully it's going to be a couple of weeks before you guys have all got your Anima. So good luck everyone with your Anima and with everything else that you're doing this patch. And I will see you all next time. Bye-bye. Bye-bye, 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 bye-bye. Bye-bye. Cheerio.